Welcome to this DaVinci Resolve Fusion node breakdown. Today's node is the camera 3D node. So we're going to jump in DaVinci Resolve and I'm going to make a new Fusion composition and drop it in. We're going to jump into Fusion. So first thing we're going to drop down before we jump into this is we're going to drop in a merge 3D node, because this is pretty much the hub of all 3D things you do within Fusion. And I'm not going to make a separate node breakdown for this because it's just simply a merge node. And you have your primary scene input and your additional stuff you're bringing into the merge. And the more you bring in, it'll keep adding these extra little white triangle inputs. And on the node itself, you have pass-through lights, which means any lights that you create in your 3D world are going to pass through. You got the option to turn them on or turn them off. And you got transform, so you can transform your entire world or your entire 3D merge, which is this little gizmo right here. So you can transform it all. And when you're in your 3D world, to navigate around, if you hold your middle mouse button, you can move it around. If you hold Alt with your middle mouse button, you can kind of pan around. If you scroll your middle mouse button up and down, you can move up and down. If you hold your control button, you can zoom in and out. So that's how you navigate around in your little 3D world here. So to bring in the camera node, we can either go up here and select this camera 3D on our little button, drag one in. Alternatively, you can hit shift space and type in camera 3D and bring in a camera 3D node. And I'm going to go ahead and add a second one. And we're going to connect our output into our merge 3D. And on your camera node itself, you have your primary input, which is your scene input. So if you input this camera inline and you had other stuff down here, this is where you would input that in at. This right here is for a second camera input if you're using stereo, and I will get to that. And this is for inputting an image to either use as an image or use as a projection. And I will get to that also. So your standard settings are, first you have your projection type, and your perspective is your default, which is your default 3D type perspective. Your orthographic is primarily used for any type of parallel camera type output you're going to use, and it'll give you like an undistorted view of any objects in your scene. So it's not going to look 3D. So if we had a cube here, instead of seeing the sides of your cube kind of go down, if we had it in orthographic, you're just going to see the front of the cube. But we're going to leave this on perspective. And your near and far clip is where your camera is going to actually clip. So we can bring this out or bring it in so it clips closer or further away. Alternatively, we can just hit this adaptive near far clip. So it's going to take anything in your scene and automatically change your near and far clipping to fit those objects in. And your angle of view type right here, your default is vertical, which is fine if you're just working within Fusion. All these other options are for if you're using it with other programs, because different programs use different angle of view types, meaning vertical, horizontal, or diagonal. And we're just going to leave it at vertical. Your angle of view dictates the area which can be seen within your camera view. So you can see we're changing our angle of view. And by default, that also changes your focal length automatically. So as we change it, you can see our focal length is changing. So if we know we want a 35 millimeter focal length, we can just type in 35. If we need a 55, we type in 55. And your focal plane is basically your depth of field. And just mind you, this is only going to work if you're using OpenGL within your renderer and you set up your depth of field within the renderer. And we will be going over the renderer here shortly. Your stereo selections right here, this is where these second cameras come in. So if you're working on a stereo project, you can select how these integrate with each other. So if you notice, we are on our main camera we had, and right now all of our stereo nodes are grayed out. But if we go to our second camera and go to our stereo nodes, they're on. So once you have a second camera, you can start changing your stereo view. And you have different modes, which is off axis. You have mono, which will bring it back together. You have toe in, which will toe the cameras in. So you can see as we move it, it's towing those cameras in. We had off axis, parallel, and you can select what camera is the actual rig attached camera. So if it's left, if we move everything, the left camera controls it all. If we make it center, the center camera will move them both. If we change it to right, the right camera will move them. And your convergent distance is just the distance to which those two cameras converge on. So I'm going to go ahead and disconnect our stereo camera because we're not going to be working in stereo. Our film back is pretty much giving us our size of our view area. So right now it's set on a Blackmagic 4K 16:9, and we can pick Area Alexa if we want. We can pick a Canon 7D, and it's going to basically give you that size. So let's go back to ISO 4.6. So you can see the size of our image changed. And right here, it's automatically giving you the aperture width and height, and this is in inches. So it's automatically changing it to fit what film gate we pick. And you can change these independently if you want. And your lens shift X and Y will just shift that lens on the X and Y axis. And your resolution gate fit just tells it how it's going to fit, whether it's going to be inside, by width, by height, on the outside, or stretch. And I usually leave this on height, but if you find your images or any projections are doing weird things, you can flip through these to see if one of these fits better. Your control visibility just tells you what you're going to see. So show view controls is going to hide everything. Our frustum is going to show or hide our frustum. Our vector is going to show or hide our camera vector. Our near clip will give you this little green area down here to show where our near clip is. So if we change that near clip, let me turn that off. If we change that near clip, you can see it changing. And you can show or hide the far clip, and you can change the subdivisions on your far clip. You can choose to see your focal plane, and you can change the subdivisions on your focal plane. And your convergence distance is just if you're working with stereo. So we can uncheck that. Now this import camera here allows you to import cameras from other programs, but it's only going to import either Lightwave scenes, Max scenes, Maya scenes, and .xsi scenes. So you're not going to be able to import cameras from Blender or Houdini or many other 3D programs that we commonly use. But you can use an FBX importer to import cameras. Up here on the transform, this is just for transforming your camera. So we can transform on the X, the Y, the Z, and we can rotate it on the X, the Y, and the Z. And all these are animatable. Right here, you can change your pivot, and it's going to change your actual pivot area. You see down here, it'll change your pivot. And you can use a target as well. So if you pick your target, so if I say added a shape, and let's make a little cube. Let's bring our cube way in the back. Let's change that size up a little bit. Let's change that size up a little bit. And if I go to my camera and I'm on my target, if I click and hold pick, and that is my target. And additionally, you can import transforms for your camera. So let's undo that. And before we can actually see any more that's going on, because if you notice, this is all the settings we have on our camera, we need to bring some other things in. So first I'm going to bring in a render node, which is right up here. And believe me, I will be going over this. So if we look, we can see what our render looks like. Now our other input here allows us to bring in an image for our camera background or for projection. So let's go ahead and bring something in. I'm going to input that. So now we have our footage being projected, not projected, as our image of our camera. So now if I look, you can see our footage with our little square in there. And let's go to our shape and let's change our material up so it's a different color. So we know it's not just a white space. And I'm going to move that a little bit. So once we imported the image, we get these additional settings of image, material, and projection. And this image that we just inputted could be pretty much treated as two different things. We can either use it as an image or we can use it as a projection. Now an image is just going to show our image on the backdrop of that camera, whereas a projection will actually project it from the camera onto the backdrop and project it on anything that's in front as well. So let's go to image first. So our fit method is just how we're going to fit that image in there, whether it's inside, by the width, by the height, or outside. We can change our depth of our image. We can change our subdivisions on that. You're not really going to see it, but it's subdividing that image up. And if we uncheck this, we can subdivide independently on our width and height. And we can choose to see the wireframe. And now you're going to see those subdivisions. So you can see how that's subdividing that image. Under our visibility tab, we can make it visible or not visible, whether it's unseen by the cameras, whether it's culling in the front or culling in the back, and whether or not we want to suppress our auxiliary channels for transparent pixels. So if there's transparent pixels in there, we can suppress those channels. Under lighting, we can choose whether it's affected by the lights or not, whether it's casting shadows or whether it's receiving shadows. Under matte, we can select whether this is to be treated as a matte. So if we actually had a matte being input into that, we can select that, and we can choose if it's got an alpha on it and whether or not it's got an infinite Z value, meaning your depth of field and all that stuff won't affect your matte. For blend modes, we just have our blend modes, whether it's additive, subtractive, cumulative, replace, transparent matte, or a solid matte. And the difference between hardware and software is just whether this is being hardware driven or software driven. So if you see, our software has much more options as far as how we're treating that blend mode, and it's got all of our typical blend modes, whereas our hardware is just pretty much hardware based and fairly limited. And you've got a gain value. If you change that, under our normals and tangents, if we need to see our normals and our tangents, we can select our normals and what our normals are. So right here, you can see our normals. So it's showing what direction our normals are facing. Same with our tangents. You can see our tangents. And some programs have specific scales, or you need to make them larger if you're doing some small stuff. So you can increase the size of those normals and those tangents. And down here is just your object ID. If you need to change your object ID, you can. So now if we wanted to use this as a projection instead of an image plane, we can uncheck that. We can enable projection. And to be able to see any of this stuff, we want to make sure we go to our render node and under our lighting tab, make sure we enable lighting and enable shadows, because by default it's off for some reason. But if we go back to our 3D node and let's bring in another shape. And we're going to make that a plane. Let's move it back. Let's move it behind our little cube there. Let's scale it up so it's big. And if we go to our render node, now you can see our image was projected on our little plane there. And you can see it's being projected on our cube as well. So that's the difference of if we enable our image plane, but you notice we're not seeing anything. So what happened is once we changed this affected by lighting, we can see our image. And sorry, our shape was kind of in the way there, but we can see our image now. So if we turn this lighting back on in our render, you can see we just lost our image, which means we need to light that image. So you would have to bring in, say, an ambient light, and we can input that. And now you can start seeing your image again. And if we crank that to 1, so now we're starting to see that image that is projected on our image plane. So let's turn this off and enable camera projection. And we need it something for it to project on, but now we can't see because our ambient light is so bright. If we disconnect our ambient light, now we can see it. We can bring that in and bring our ambient light down. You can start seeing that image being projected. So under your projection, you can change your projection fit method, whether it's inside, width, height, outside, or stretch to fit. I'm just going to go height. And your projection mode is whether it's using light, ambient light, or a texture. And you can change your projector ID if you have multiple projectors, and your projector priority. So if you want this to take priority over other projectors, you can. And this project on back faces just means if you're viewing it, if you're being projected this way and you're viewing it from this way, whether or not that projection is going to show up on the back. And then under your material tab, you can change your material of your little camera background there. But we're going to have to turn this off. We'll turn this on. Let's disconnect this. Let's turn our ambient light back up. And if we go to our material, you can see as we change our material, it's changing our background. So just know this material only works when you're working on the image plane level. And it doesn't work when you're working on the projection level. So within your material, you can change all your material info. You can change the opacity or the alpha and the opacity. You can change your specular intensity, your transmittance. You can change the color, your alpha detail, color detail, saturation, and you can change whether this is receives lighting or receives shadows, and whether it's two-sided, meaning showing in the back as well. And then we have our material ID to change the ID of your material. And that is it for the camera controls. I know it may be confusing, but as we go through all the rest of these nodes, this will all start making more sense. And I know I went through the rest of these kind of quick, but I will cover all these in additional node breakdowns. So that is your camera 3D node. Have fun playing with it, and I will see you in the next node breakdown.